Hey, so the last video ended a bit abruptly. The battery on my camera died. I apologize. We're continuing with Turning Pro. I'm going to start on that page again, Addicted to Love. I have a friend who's addicted to love. I can relate to this addiction myself. I've known her my whole life, and it's absolutely excruciating to listen to the chronicle of her romances. She migrates from one passionate, all-consuming affair to the next. She is in agony throughout the affair, and the affair always ends in agony. It will not surprise you, I'm sure, when I report that this woman is one of the most gifted, talented people I've ever met. She's a piano prodigy. Her photographs win prizes, and she's a near world-class athlete. She has swum the Maui Big Island ocean crossing half a dozen times. Over the years, my friend has developed a philosophy, you could almost call it a religion, about pursuing the sublime through love. This philosophy is so complex and so convincing that she can not only persuade herself of its reality, but you or me too if we sit long enough to listen to her. She is mesmerizing. At the same time, the experience is bone-numbingly tedious, watching her transit from one great love to the next, with each drama playing out exactly the same cadence, and each one culminating in exactly the same dead end. My friend knows this is resistance. We've talked about it 100 times. She's running away from her gifts, and she knows it. But the habit is too strong. She has become identified with it. It is who she is. Habits. This book is about habits. The difference between an amateur and a professional is in their habits. An amateur has amateur habits. A professional has professional habits. We can never free ourselves from habits. The human being is a creature of habit. But we can replace bad habits with good ones. We can trade in habits of the amateur and the addict for the practice of the professional and the committed artist or entrepreneur. It may help as a jumping off place to consider the interior world of the most passionate and tragic creature of habit, the addict. Have you ever noticed that addicts are often extremely interesting people? Addiction itself is excruciatingly boring. It's boring because it's predictable. The lies, the evasions, the transparent self-justifications and self-exonerations. But the addict himself is often a colorful and fascinating person. If he has been a substance abuser for any length of time, his story often reads like a novel, packed with drama, conflict, and intrigue. If the addict's drug of choice is alcohol, the narrative is frequently one of job loss, domestic abuse, divorce, abandonment of children, bankruptcy. If Class 1 narcotics are the culprits, the tale often includes troubles with the law, crime, prison time, violence, even death. Of course, you and I can be addicted to any number of things, to love, sex, worship of our children or our parents, to dominance, to submission. We can even be addicted to ourselves. See Charlie Sheen or Donald Trump. Such individuals can be absolutely fascinating at the same time that they're boring as hell. What then is the connection between addiction and resistance? Art and addiction. For the past several years, I've written a weekly post on my website, stephenpresserfield.com, called Writing Wednesdays. Far and away, the most popular entries in that space have been in my Artist and Addict series. One of the points those posts made was that there's not that big difference between an artist and an addict. Many artists are addicts and vice versa. Many are artists in one breath and addicts in another. What's the difference? The addict is the amateur. The artist is the professional. Both addict and artist are dealing with the same material, which is the pain of being human and the struggle against self-sabotage. But the addict or amateur and the artist or professional deal with these elements in fundamentally different ways. When I say addiction, by the way, I'm not referring only to the serious clinical maladies of alcoholism, drug dependence, domestic abuse and so forth. Web surfing counts too. So do compulsive texting, sexting, twittering and facebooking. Distractions, displacement activities. When we're living as amateurs, we're running away from our calling, meaning our work, our destiny, the obligation to become our truest and highest selves. Addiction becomes a surrogate for our calling. We enact the addiction instead of embracing the calling. Why? Because to follow a calling requires work. It's hard, it hurts. It demands entering the pain zone of effort, risk, and exposure. So we take the amateur route instead. Instead of composing our symphony, We create a shadow symphony, of which we ourselves are the orchestra, the conductor, and the composer, and the audience. Our life becomes a shadow drama, a shadow startup company, a shadow philanthropic venture. Have you ever been to New Orleans? In Tennessee, William-esque southern cities, Savannah and Charleston also come to mind. You find characters. The colourful old lady with 39 cats, the purple-haired dude who has turned his apartment into a shrine to James Dean. In the South, you can get away with that stuff. It's kinda cool. The shadow enactment has been elevated to such a level that it becomes folklore, even almost art. My life used to be a shadow novel. It had plot, characters, sex scenes, action scenes. It had mood, atmosphere, texture. It was scary, it was weird, it was exciting. I had friends who were living out shadow movies, or creating shadow art, or initiating shadow industries. These were our addictions, and we worked for them and all they were worth. There was only one problem. None of us was writing a real novel or painting a real painting or starting a real business. We were amateurs, living in the past or dreaming of the future, while failing utterly to do the work necessary to progress in the present. When you turn pro, your life gets very simple. The Zen monk, the artist, the entrepreneur often lead lives so plain they're practically invisible. Miyamoto Musashi's dojo was smaller than my living room. Things became superfluous for him. In the end, he didn't even need a sword. The amateur is an egotist. He takes the material of his personal pain and uses it to draw attention to himself. He creates a life, a character, a personality. The artist and the professional, on the other hand, have turned a corner in their minds. They have succeeded in stepping back from themselves. They have grown so bored with themselves and so sick of their petty bullshit that they can manipulate those elements away. They can manipulate those elements the way a hazmat technician handles weapons-grade plutonium. They manipulate them for the good of others. What were once their shadow symphonies become real symphonies. The color, the drama that were once outside now move inside. Turning pro is an act of self-abnegation. Not self with a capital S, but with a little s. Self. Ego. Distraction. Displacement. Addiction. Those last ones, ego, distraction, displacement, addiction, all written with capitals, by the way. When we turn pro, the energy that once went into the shadow novel goes into the real novel. What we once thought was real, the world, including its epicenter, ourselves, turns out to be only a shadow. And what had seemed to be only a dream becomes now the reality of our lives. Resistance and addiction. The pre-addictive individual, that is you and I when we're young, experiences a calling to art, to service, to honorable sacrifice. In other words, we experience positive aspiration, a vision of the higher, realized self we might become. The intimation of this calling is followed immediately by the apparition of resistance, fear, self-doubt, self-sabotage. What makes this moment so soul precarious is that most of us are unconscious in the event of both our aspirations and our resistance. We're asleep. We know only that something is wrong and we don't know how to fix it. We're restless, we're bored, we're angry. We burn to accomplish something great, but we don't know where to begin. Even if we did, we'd be so terrified that we still couldn't take a step. Enter a drink, a lover, a habit. Addiction replaces aspiration. The quick fix wins out over the long, slow haul. Addiction and shadow careers. When we can't stand the fear, the shame, the self-reproach that we feel, we obliterate it with an addiction. The addiction becomes the shadow version, the evil twin of our calling to service or to art. That's why addicts are so interesting and so boring at the same time. They're interesting because they're called to something new, something unique, something that we, watching, can't wait to see them bring forth into manifestation. At the same time, they're boring because they never do the work. Instead, the addict enacts his aspiration in the shadow form. The addiction becomes his novel, his adventure, his great love. The work of art or service that might have been produced is replaced by the drama, conflict, and suffering of the addict's crazy, haunted, shattered life. The addict as a dramatic hero. Robert McKee in his story seminars testifies that the essential quality in a fictional protagonist, that is, the hero in a book or movie, is that he or she must possess the passion and will to push the story to the limits of human experience in order to achieve their goal. Otherwise there would be no story. This heroic monomania is also the definition of the addict. The lush or the junkie will sell her own mother to score the substance she is jonesing for. Why I don't knock addiction. Addictions are not bad. They are simply the shadow forms of a more noble and exalted calling. Our addictions are our callings themselves, only encrypted and incognito. They are a metaphor for our best selves, the coded version of our higher aspirations. Addictions and shadow careers are messages in a bottle from our unconscious. Our self, in the Jungian sense, is trying to get our attention, to have an intervention with us. The question we need to ask of a shadow career or an addiction is the same question the psychotherapist asks of a dream. What is your unconscious trying to tell us? Pulling the pin. When I was 29, I spent a season picking apples in Chelan, Washington. The job sounds idyllic, I know, but it was hard work. It was migrant labor. The season lasted 6 weeks. It started with the Romes, then moved to the deliciouses. When the cold started, the wine saps came in. These were the hardest to pick. They cut the flesh of your hands with their sharp, barbed spurs, particularly when you pick them before the sun came up, with the frost on the stems and your fingers frozen. One of the top pickers was a guy named Dave, who had been an infantryman with the 1st Marine Division at the Chosin Reservoir in Korea, November-December 1950, when temperatures fell to 30 below zero and the beleaguered American troops were surrounded by 67,000 soldiers of the Chinese 9th Army, one of the most hellish, valiant ordeals in US military history. I asked Dave how he picked wine saps. With a great deal of pain, he said. Dave was a terrific guy, funny, kind and generous, who had chosen to live on the fritz, as the Wobblies used to say back in the 20s. He was a drinker who lived most of the year in an SRO hotel on Skid Row in Seattle. The term Skid Row, Dave told me, derived from the original Skid Road in Seattle, where the lumbermen used to slide their timber to the harbor on the skids. But he came out on the tramp at harvest time to work the apples in Washington and the cherries in Marysville, California. Dave got a veteran's disability check from Uncle Sam, but he was such a good picker that he could put away a nice wad of cash for winter with a few months' labor in the fall. You get paid by the bin, 4 by 4 and 3 deep, for picking apples. I could do 2 a day when I started, never more than 3. Dave routinely knocked off 6, 7, 8. We got $4 a bin, maybe 6, I can't remember. There was also a $1 a bin bonus at the end of the season if you stuck around. Dave stuck, and so did I. Most of the tramps pulled the pin. What is a tramp anyway? Dave explained. What is a tramp anyway? Dave explained. A tramp is an itinerant worker. A hobo is an itinerant non-worker. A bum is a non-itinerant non-worker. The term pulling the pin comes from the old days of riding the rails. To uncouple one car from another, the train crew pulled a heavy steel pin out of the coupling mechanism. In migrant lingo, pulling the pin meant quitting. You'd wake up and the bunk next to you would be empty. What happened to Jim? He pulled the pin. I could relate to pulling the pin. I pulled the pin on my first book 99.9% of the way through. I pulled the pin on my marriage. I had never done anything in my life to that point where I hadn't pulled the pin. I was determined now not to pull the pin. I asked Dave why he and the other tramps drank wine. Hard liquor will destroy your liver, he said. Good whiskey is expensive and the cheap stuff is poison. Beer, you have to drink a case minimum to get where you need to get. If you don't have a car, how can you carry it? Plus, if you're pissing all night long, wine is best. You can get a decent buzz on a bottle or two, and the stuff is made, at least partly, from a natural product, grapes. Who knows, there might even be a tad of nutrition in there. I was the only person in the bunkhouse who had a vehicle, so I gave everybody rides into town. Mostly they stayed on the orchard though. Work started at first light. By the end of the day, most men were so tired they just wanted to kill a bottle or two and snug down under a blanket. I didn't drink. Instead I talked to everybody. Jack was probably the coolest of the fruit tramps. He looked like Steve McQueen and was an ace car mechanic, as well as being almost as fast a picker as Dave. He used to cough up blood in such quantities that his pillow couldn't be laundered. They had to throw it away. I asked Jack why he didn't get a real job. He was going to kill himself. It was clear if he stayed out on the road. I tried man, many times. Last year my sister's husband took me in, back in Enid, Oklahoma, where I'm from. Had a job, nice little apartment, even had a girlfriend. I asked him what happened. One morning I woke up, just couldn't take it anymore, pulled the pin. Pulling the pin part 2. Two things struck me. Oh, sorry. We're going to cut that there. 15 minutes, perfect. We're going to cut that there. We're going to come into pulling the pin part 2 in the next episode. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.